I went to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore last summer. I have a lot of thoughts about the experiences I had on the Baltimore Light Rail Link, which provides north south rail connections in the Baltimore area. I'm still thinking about those experiences. So let's talk about them in today's video. When I visited Baltimore last summer, I got on the train at Baltimore Street after visiting the National Aquarium. I took the train north to Mount Washington. After visiting a couple of places in Mount Washington, I took the train south to the convention center in downtown Baltimore so that I could visit the Babe Ruth Birthplace and Museum and enjoy more of the Inner Harbor area. I went to an Orioles game at Camden Yards, which was so much fun. And then, at the end of the night, I took a train north to the Mount Royal Micah station, the closest stop to Baltimore Penn Station. Or at least the closest until whenever the actual Baltimore Penn Station stop for the light rail link reopens. My first impression upon getting on was that the train was stopping. A lot. That's because the train was running at grade along Howard Street, and therefore stopping at a lot of the stoplights. Like, I know there's a lot of light rail, at least in the US, that runs at grade and stops at stoplights like the cars and the buses. But it felt like the light cycles just weren't in my favor, and it was so frustrating. About the only silver lining was that I didn't feel ill while doing all the stopping and starting. Usually, when I'm in a car starting and stopping as much as this train did, I tend to get carsick. Well, here, I didn't get train sick. So at least the ride was smooth. I don't know how much credit for this goes to the train operator for being a smooth driver, or how much of it was the vehicle for providing a smooth ride. Regardless, credit should go somewhere. Even though I didn't get train sick, I was excited when the train got off of Howard Street and onto grade separated tracks. And it was upon ending up on those grade separated tracks that I realized that it might not actually take forever to end up at Mount Washington. And thankfully, it didn't. Nevertheless, I actually needed some time and some activities in Mount Washington so that I could not be fixated in my resentment over how slow that ride was on Howard Street. And while this is a rail transit advocacy channel, I do want to highlight a couple of gems in Mount Washington that got my mind off of said resentment. One is Ethel's Quail Kitchen, where I grabbed some delicious cornbread, along with gumbo spicy enough that I would stop eating under normal circumstances, but yummy enough that I just couldn't stop eating it despite it being spicy. The people there were also very friendly. The other is Baltimore Clay Works, which a friend recommended to me. There were a couple of neat exhibits when I was there, and I'm saying that as someone who is not an art person per se. A version of me who is in a better mood hopped back on the light rail link to the convention center station in downtown Baltimore to visit the Babe Ruth birthplace and museum. After all, I was watching a baseball game that night, so it seemed fitting to visit a baseball museum. The ride back to downtown was less memorable. Perhaps I had by now accepted my fate that this train was going to slow down once I got onto at grade tracks at Howard Street. What I did remember, though, was that I waited over 10 minutes for the train back at Mount Washington, which I wouldn't have been upset about if not for the fact that it was raining and I didn't bring an umbrella with me on the trip despite the rainy forecast. At least the station had a shelter I could stand under. One other positive thing I'll say about my experience on the train, and all the trains I was on that day, was that they were all relatively clean. I've been on some really messy subway trains in New York and Philadelphia, with a lot of litter. Not so much during my day using the light rail link. So kudos to the cleaning staff who works on the trains, as well as the train riders for not creating a mess. Anyway, I got off at Convention Center to visit the Babe Ruth birthplace and museum. It's a cool place to visit if you're a baseball fan. You don't even have to be a fan of the New York Yankees to enjoy it. In Camden Yards, the Major League Baseball ballpark I visited on that night, was also a fun experience and a very charming ballpark, in my opinion. But then, I had to hop back on the light rail link after I left the game so that I could get to Baltimore Penn Station. And then at Baltimore Penn, I'd take the last Amtrak train of the night to Washington, D.C., where I was staying. An adventure would be an understatement to describe my ride on the light rail link heading out of the ballpark. Despite leaving during the eighth inning so that I could catch that Amtrak train, the light rail link train was so packed that I almost wasn't able to get on. I almost had to call an Uber so that I could get to the Amtrak station on time. Thankfully, I got on a train, but oh boy, all of us on the train were packed like sardines. It was one of the most memorable train rides of my life, for sure. The Orioles were losing when my fellow riders and I left the ballpark, so that just made the vibes all the more blah on that train. For months after that experience, I was upset with the lack of extra train service to accommodate for the crowd. But also, as I said earlier, I was leaving in the eighth inning. So, in retrospect, perhaps my expectations were a little unreasonable. I'm not sure I can reasonably expect any metro system to have extra service during games. We should expect them after major sporting events, but not necessarily during them. That said, while doing research for this video, I stumbled upon a Reddit post where someone gave their feelings on the nightmare of a transit situation it was after a Baltimore Ravens football game. So perhaps Baltimore doesn't have their special event transit figured out. If any of you live in the Baltimore area, please mention in the comment section below what the train is like after Orioles and Ravens games. Anyway, here are my thoughts from a whole day of using the light rail link. I don't think I would have been so frustrated with the train service if not for the contrast with the DC Metro. I spent most of my time in this area in DC instead of Baltimore, and my experiences with the DC Metro were really good. So good, that's one of the reasons I could see myself retiring to that part of the country in a few decades. But only if a future partner of mine wants that too. Despite the unfair comparison my brain made, and continues to make, between the light rail link and DC Metro, I think that there are some positives to talk about with the light rail link. I found it to be a relatively comfortable ride, clean, and pretty fast when it was grade separated. And it also extends pretty far out into the northern suburbs, something I only appreciated fully months after visiting. Like, you don't need to go that far north of Hunt Valley, the northern terminus of this line, for it to look like this. One other plus, it was extremely affordable. Case in point, I got a 1-day pass for $4.60. And between my 3 train rides and my 1 bus ride, I essentially ended up paying an average of $1.15 per ride. For some context, the last time transit was as cheap as $1.15 per ride in my hometown of New York City was in the early 1990s. However, my adventures are evidence that at-grade light rail sucks. It may be the cheapest solution when building rail, but it is also the suckiest. To Maryland MTA's credit, I've learned that they have invested in transit signal priority years ago for the portion of the line on Howard Street. This was the right thing to do, as it was a relatively cheap way of massively speeding up commutes for at-grade rail. And yet, despite the transit signal priority, it was a slow go until we got to the grade separated portion. This is a design flaw of not just Baltimore's system, but many light rail systems, at least in the United States. The only surefire solution is grade separation. The crowd train after I left the Orioles game is something I'm willing to pass judgment on, pending my learning more about what service is like after Orioles and Ravens games. But If Maryland MTA, who operates the light rail, has no extra service after these major sporting events, then I promise you that I will judge a lot. So, there you have it, with my thoughts on the Baltimore Light Rail link. I'd like to hear in the comment section below whether my thoughts on the light rail link match up with any of your experiences with it. I'd also like to read comments that mention what you think of this style of video, where I give thoughts on transit lines in the cities that I visit. If this is a popular video type, I may do other similar content in the future. If not, it's no big loss. Make sure also to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the bell icon so that you're notified when I publish a video. Thank you, and have a good day.